stood before the massive viewing screen in the council chamber, his crystalline body reflecting the blue light that filled the room. The Galactic Observation Council had called him in for another assignment. As one of their best field observers, he had watched 17 different species fight and lose wars over the past 3 centuries. Each time, the outcome was predictable. The stronger species won. The weaker species died or became slaves. Today felt different, though. The council members seemed more curious than usual. "Observer," spoke council leader, her voice echoing through the chamber like broken glass. "We have a new species for you to study. They call themselves humans." Nodded. He had heard whispers about this species. They lived on a small blue planet in a quiet corner of the galaxy. Nothing special about them from what he knew. They were young, barely having left their home world a few decades ago. "What makes them interesting?" asked. Touched a control panel. The viewing screen changed to show images of humans. Saw soft, pink creatures with no natural armor. No claws, no venom, no thick skin. They looked incredibly weak. "They are about to fight the Empire," explained. Felt surprise flow through his crystal structure. They were one of the most violent species in the galaxy. They had conquered over 40 different worlds. Their warriors stood 8 feet tall with rock-hard skin and claws that could cut through metal. They lived for war and had never lost a major battle. "This should be over quickly," said. "What am I supposed to learn from watching a massacre?" "That is exactly what we want to know," replied. "These humans have something we do not understand. They refuse to surrender even though they know they cannot win. 3 months ago, they demanded they give up their colonies. The humans said no." Looked at the images again. The humans looked so fragile. Their weapons were basic compared to technology. Their ships were smaller and slower. By every logical measure, they should have surrendered immediately. "Perhaps they are simply too stupid to understand they will lose," suggested. "Perhaps," said, "but we need to be sure. Your job is to observe their military tactics and document their defeat. We want to understand how quickly primitive species collapse under pressure." Accepted the assignment without hesitation. It seemed simple enough. He would watch the humans lose, write a report about their poor decisions, and return to the council with data they could use for future observations. 2 days later, boarded his observation ship. The vessel was small but equipped with the best cloaking technology the council possessed. No one would be able to detect him while he watched the war unfold. His ship was also equipped with advanced recording equipment and analysis computers. Everything he saw would be documented and studied. The council wanted detailed records of how quickly an outmatched species would break under the stress of hopeless warfare. During the journey to human space, reviewed what little information the council had gathered about humans. They were mammals from a world they called Earth. They had only developed space travel recently and had established colonies on just 12 worlds. Their total population was barely 3 billion across all their settlements. The Empire, by comparison, controlled over 200 worlds with a population of nearly 50 billion. They had been conquering other species for over 1,000 years. Their military was legendary for its efficiency and cruelty. Calculated that the war would last perhaps 2 weeks, maybe 3 if the humans decided to hide on their home world after losing their colonies. It would be tragic but predictable. Weak species always lost to strong ones. That was the natural order of the galaxy. When his ship reached the border between human and space, positioned himself near a human colony called New Geneva. Intelligence reports suggested this would be one of the first targets in the war. The colony had a population of about 2 million and minimal defenses. Through his ship's sensors, could see the human settlement below. It looked peaceful. Farms spread across green valleys. Cities with tall buildings reached toward the sky. Children played in parks while their parents worked in factories and offices. None of them seemed to understand that they would all be dead or enslaved within days. 3 human warships patrolled the system, analyzed their capabilities, and shook his head in disappointment. Each ship carried maybe 50 fighters and had weapons that were decades behind technology. When the attack came, these ships would be destroyed in minutes. On the 4th day of his observation, detected massive energy signatures approaching from space. A full battle fleet was coming. 200 ships filled with thousands of warriors eager for conquest and glory. The human defenders received warning of the approaching fleet but made no attempt to flee. Found this puzzling. Any reasonable species would evacuate their civilians and retreat to fight another day. Instead, the humans seemed to be preparing for battle. Civilian transports began moving people away from military areas, but most of the population remained on the planet. The 3 human warships moved into defensive positions around the colony. Additional fighters launched from hidden bases on the surface. Counted 60 human fighters in total. They would face over 1,000 vessels in the coming battle. As he watched the humans make their final preparations, noticed something strange. The human pilots and soldiers showed no signs of panic or despair. They moved with calm determination, checking their equipment and saying goodbye to their families. Some of them were actually smiling. Wondered if humans were too primitive to understand mathematics. Did they somehow think 60 ships could defeat 1,000? Or did they simply not care that they were about to die? The fleet arrived 12 hours later. Their ships emerged from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation, blocking out stars with their massive hulls. Each vessel was a work of art designed to inspire terror. Spikes and blades covered their surfaces. Weapons ports glowed with deadly energy. The lead ship broadcast a message to the human colony. Surrender now and your deaths will be quick. Resist and we will make you suffer for days before ending your misery. Expected immediate surrender. Instead, the human response surprised him completely. This is Admiral Sarah of the New Geneva Defense Force. You are not welcome in our space. Leave now or face the consequences. Stared at his instruments in disbelief. The humans were actually threatening the Empire. The commander laughed at Admiral's threat. His voice boomed across all communication channels so everyone in the system could hear his amusement. You dare threaten us with your tiny fleet, they said. We have conquered species far stronger than you. Your weapons cannot even scratch our armor. Watched through his sensors as the human ships moved into attack formation. This was exactly what he expected. The humans would make one desperate charge, be destroyed quickly, and then they would land on the planet to begin their conquest. But something strange happened next. The human ships did not charge forward in a hopeless attack. Instead, they spread out across the system and began moving in unpredictable patterns. Some ships flew toward asteroid fields, others headed for the planet's moons. A few actually flew away from the battle entirely. Frowned, this made no tactical sense. By splitting up their forces, the humans made themselves even weaker than before. They could now destroy them one group at a time without any risk. The commander seemed equally confused by this strategy. What are these creatures doing? He muttered over his communication system. Are they running away or trying to fight? The answer came 30 minutes later when the battle began. The fleet moved forward to engage the scattered human ships. But every time they approached a human vessel, it would disappear behind an asteroid or moon. The humans were using the natural features of the solar system to hide and strike from unexpected angles. When ships followed the humans into asteroid fields, they found themselves under attack from multiple directions. Human fighters would emerge from behind rocks, fire their weapons, and then vanish again before they could respond. Watched in fascination as this pattern repeated over and over. The humans were not trying to win a direct battle. They were trying to confuse and frustrate their enemies while slowly wearing them down. But that was not the most surprising thing. During one engagement near the planet's largest moon, A human fighter was badly damaged by weapons. The pilot was clearly dying, and his ship was about to explode. Any logical warrior would have tried to escape, or at least taken some enemies with him in a final attack. Instead, the dying human pilot used his last moments to send a warning to other human ships about an ambush. He died saving his comrades rather than trying to kill his enemies. Made detailed notes about this incident. In 3 centuries of observing warfare, he had never seen anything like it. Warriors fought to kill enemies, not to help friends. Individual survival was always the top priority. The strange human behavior continued throughout the first week of fighting. When a human transport ship carrying medical supplies was attacked by raiders, 3 human warships broke off from their assigned missions to rescue it. They lost 2 of their ships, saving 1 transport that had no military value. Calculated that this decision cost the humans 20% of their remaining fleet to save a few dozen medical officers. By any logical standard, it was a terrible mistake. But the rescued medical officers immediately began treating wounded human pilots from other battles. Within hours, dozens of injured humans were back in their fighters, ready to continue the war. The medical transport, it turned out, was more valuable than the warships that died protecting it. They became increasingly angry as the days passed. They were used to quick victories against enemies who fought in predictable ways. The humans refused to follow any known patterns of warfare. When cornered, most species would surrender or fight desperately for their own lives. The humans did neither. They would sacrifice themselves to buy time for other humans to escape. When given the chance to save themselves by abandoning wounded comrades, they chose to stay and fight hopeless battles. Observed one particularly confusing incident during the second week of fighting. A group of 50 human fighters was trapped in a narrow canyon between 2 moons. 300 ships surrounded them with no escape route available. The logical response would be immediate surrender. They had even offered to spare the lives of any humans who gave up their weapons. Instead of surrendering, the humans did something that shocked even the battle-hardened warriors. They began singing. Instruments detected the transmission coming from all 50 human ships. It was a song he had never heard before, with lyrics about freedom and sacrifice and never giving up hope. The humans sang while they prepared for their final battle. When they attacked, the humans fought with incredible determination. They knew they were going to die, but they seemed almost happy about it. They shared jokes over their communication system while their ships were being destroyed around them. The last human pilot transmitted a final message before his ship exploded. "Tell our families we died free." Stared at his instruments in confusion. The humans had just thrown away 50 valuable fighters and experienced pilots for absolutely no gain. They could have surrendered and lived to fight another day. Instead, they chose death. But the story did not end there. News of the canyon battle spread throughout human space within hours. Instead of demoralizing other human forces, the sacrifice seemed to make them fight even harder. Recruitment centers on human worlds reported thousands of new volunteers joining their military. The humans were not becoming weaker as they lost battles. They were becoming stronger. This pattern repeated itself over and over during the next month. Every time humans died for their cause, more humans stepped forward to replace them. Every sacrifice seemed to inspire 10 more acts of courage. The meanwhile were becoming frustrated and angry. They had expected an easy victory and quick profits from selling human slaves. Instead, they were fighting a war that seemed to have no end. Some commanders began requesting permission to return home. Others started making mistakes because they were tired and angry. A few even began to question whether conquering humans was worth the effort. Realized he was witnessing something completely new. The humans were not fighting like any species he had ever observed. They were not trying to minimize their losses or maximize their gains. They seemed to be fighting for something that had no physical form. When human pilots died, they spoke about freedom and justice and protecting innocent people. When warriors died, they spoke about glory and conquest and personal honor. The humans were fighting for ideas. They were fighting for things. Made careful notes about this observation. He suspected it might be important, though he did not yet understand why. As the first month of the war ended, the humans had lost over half their ships and many of their colonies. By every measure that mattered to military strategists, they were losing badly. But somehow, they did not seem defeated. If anything, they appeared to be just getting started. Spent the next several weeks trying to understand what he was seeing. The war had now lasted 2 months, far longer than anyone had predicted. The humans continued to lose ships and territory, but they showed no signs of giving up. More confusing still, they kept making decisions that made no sense from a military perspective. The incident that changed everything happened above a small world called Haven Colony. Haven was not strategically important. It had no valuable resources, no military bases, and no industrial facilities. The planet's only purpose was to house refugees from other wars throughout the galaxy. Thousands of alien families had fled there from conflicts in distant star systems. When the fleet arrived to capture Haven, expected the humans to abandon it without a fight. After all, defending refugees would not help humans win the war. It would only waste ships and lives that could be better used protecting human colonies. Instead, the humans sent their entire reserve fleet to defend Haven. Admiral herself led the defense force. She brought 60 of the human ships and their most experienced pilots. It was the largest human fleet assembled since the war began. Watched in amazement as positioned her ships between the fleet and the refugee planet below. She was risking everything to protect aliens who were not even human. The commander was equally puzzled by this decision. He opened a communication channel to Admiral. "Why do you defend these creatures?" he asked. "They are not your species. Their deaths will not harm your people. Stand aside and we will let you leave in peace." Admiral's response confused even more than her decision to fight. "These refugees trusted us to keep them safe," she said. "We gave them our word. Humans do not break their promises to those who need protection." The commander laughed. "Your word, you would die for a promise made to aliens. This is madness." "Maybe it is," replied, "but it is what makes us human." The battle that followed was unlike anything had observed before. The human ships fought with desperate courage, knowing they were outnumbered 3-1. But what struck most was how they fought. Every tactical decision was made to protect the planet below, even when it put human ships at greater risk. When vessels broke through the human lines and headed for the planet, human fighters threw themselves into suicide attacks to stop them. Pilots who could have escaped chose, instead, to ram their damaged ships into vessels. Recorded dozens of individual acts of sacrifice during that battle. Human warriors giving their lives not for victory, but simply to buy a few more minutes for the refugees to evacuate. But the most shocking moment came when the battle seemed lost. Admiral's flagship had been badly damaged. Half her fleet was destroyed. The remaining human ships were low on fuel and ammunition. The logical decision was to retreat and save what forces they could. Instead, made an announcement that would never forget. "All ships prepare for final assault," she commanded. "We are not leaving this system until every refugee is safe." Watched as the surviving human ships formed up for one last attack. They were going to die, and everyone knew it, but they were smiling as they prepared for battle. One young pilot transmitted a message to his family back on Earth. "Tell my children that their father died doing the right thing." Another pilot, a woman barely out of her teens, spoke to her squadron. "Remember, we are not fighting for territory or resources. We are fighting so that innocent people can live free." These humans were about to die for strangers, not for their own species, but for aliens they had never met and would never see again. As the final battle began, something unexpected happened. The refugees on the planet below had been watching the fight from their evacuation centers. Most of them were from species that had been conquered by in previous wars. They knew what defeat meant. Suddenly, every refugee ship on the planet launched into space. Sensors detected hundreds of small vessels rising from Haven's surface. They were not warships. They were civilian transports, cargo haulers, and personal spacecraft operated by refugees who had never been soldiers. But they were flying directly into the battle zone. The lead refugee ship opened a communication channel that reached both the human and fleets. "We are the people you are dying to protect," said a voice speaking for all the refugees. "We cannot let you face this alone. We stand with humanity." What followed was the strangest battle had ever witnessed. Hundreds of refugee ships, piloted by dozens of different alien species, joined the fight against the. They had no military training and their ships had no weapons, but they used their vessels as shields to protect human fighters and as rams to disable ships. A family of crystalline beings from the sector flew their transport ship directly into a cruiser to save a damaged human fighter. An elderly trader from the Vega colonies used his cargo hauler to block missiles aimed at Admiral's flagship. Realized he was watching something that had never happened before in galactic history. Different species were fighting and dying together for an idea rather than for conquest or survival. The battle lasted 6 more hours. When it ended, both the human fleet and the attack force had been virtually destroyed, but every refugee transport had escaped safely to other star systems. Admiral's final transmission before her ship exploded captured something that was only beginning to understand. "This is what we fight for," she said. "Not for ourselves, but for the idea that all sentient beings deserve freedom and protection. As long as that idea lives, humanity will never surrender." After the battle, spent days reviewing his recordings and trying to make sense of what he had seen. The humans had lost their best ships and most experienced officers defending a planet with no strategic value. By every military calculation, it was a devastating defeat that brought them much closer to losing the war. But notice something strange in his post-battle analysis. News of the Haven defense spread throughout both human and alien communities. Volunteer fighters began arriving from all over the galaxy to join the human cause. Species that had never shown interest in the war suddenly began offering supplies, intelligence, and ships to help humanity. Even more surprising, some warriors began to question their own cause, intercepted several communications from ships expressing doubt about their mission. Some were asking why they were fighting beings who would die to protect strangers. The humans had lost the battle but somehow gained strength from their defeat. They were inspiring others to join their cause by showing what they were willing to sacrifice for it. Finally began to understand what made humans different from every other species he had studied. Most species fought to survive, to gain territory, or to acquire resources. Those were logical, understandable motivations based on biological needs. Humans fought for something else entirely. They fought for principles that existed only in their minds: freedom, justice, the protection of innocence. These concepts had no physical form, yet humans were willing to die for them. More importantly, these ideas seemed to be contagious. Other species who witnessed human sacrifice began to adopt human values as their own. Made careful notes about this phenomenon. He suspected it would be crucial to understanding how this war would end. But he was beginning to fear that his initial predictions had been completely wrong. Everything changed after the Haven defense. Notice the shift in human behavior within days of Admiral's sacrifice. The defensive, protective fighting style that had confused him for months suddenly disappeared. In its place came something that terrified even the battle-hardened. The first sign appeared when a supply convoy was attacked near the outer rim of human space. Observed the battle expecting to see the usual human tactics, hit-and-run attacks designed to slow down the enemy while minimizing human casualties. Instead, he watched human fighters pursue the fleeing convoy with relentless determination. When ships tried to surrender, the humans ignored their pleas and continued attacking until every enemy vessel was destroyed. No prisoners were taken, no mercy was shown. Replayed the battle recordings multiple times, trying to understand what had changed. These same humans had spent months showing compassion to wounded enemies and protecting innocent civilians. Now they fought like creatures possessed. The human squadron leader's final transmission explained everything. "This is for Admiral and every refugee who trusted us to keep them safe." The humans had not become cruel or evil. They had simply decided to stop holding back. Over the following weeks, observed a complete transformation in human military strategy. The careful, defensive tactics that prioritized saving lives were replaced by aggressive attacks designed purely to destroy the enemy. Human ships began using kamikaze attacks as standard tactics rather than last resorts. Pilots would deliberately crash their fighters into vessels while broadcasting messages of determination and purpose. But unlike the desperate suicide attacks had seen from other losing species, these human attacks were carefully planned and devastatingly effective. A single human fighter pilot named became legendary throughout both fleets for his kamikaze runs, had lost his family when they bombed his home colony. Instead of seeking revenge through random violence, he turned himself into a precision weapon. Watched study ship designs for weeks, learning exactly where to strike for maximum damage. Then would fly his fighter directly into the weak points of enemy vessels, timing his attacks to cause catastrophic chain reactions. Destroyed 7 cruisers in solo attacks before finally being shot down. His last transmission was broadcast across all human frequencies. 1 human life for 7 enemy ships. This is how we win. Other human pilots began copying tactics, but with their own innovations. Some would pack their fighters with explosives to increase damage. Others would coordinate their attacks, with multiple pilots targeting different parts of the same ship simultaneously. They had never faced enemies who fought this way. Their entire military doctrine was based on the assumption that all species valued their own lives above victory. Soldiers who did not fear death were impossible to intimidate or demoralize. Observed commanders growing increasingly desperate as their losses mounted. They began pulling back from exposed positions and requesting reinforcements from their home worlds. But the humans were just getting started. Earth's planetary government made an announcement that shocked the entire galaxy. They declared total war against the Empire and began converting their entire civilization into a military production system. Civilian factories stopped making consumer goods and began producing weapons. Schools became military training centers. Even children as young as 12 began learning basic combat skills and ship maintenance. Calculated that humanity was spending nearly 80% of their total resources on the war effort. Such an extreme mobilization was typically only seen when species faced complete extinction. But humans were not fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for something they called justice. The most chilling example of this new human mindset came during the siege of Station 7. The station was a major supply depot that supported operations throughout human space. It was heavily defended by orbital platforms and protected by a fleet of warships. Instead of attempting a direct assault that would cost thousands of human lives, the human fleet tried a different approach. They negotiated. Admiral Sarah Martinez, Admiral's replacement, opened a communication channel with the station commander. Her offer was simple and terrifying. Surrender the station and your lives will be spared. Refuse, and we will destroy you all, even if it costs us our entire fleet. The commander laughed at this threat. His station had defenses that could destroy any attacking fleet twice over. Martinez's response revealed how completely human thinking had changed. "You misunderstand," she said calmly. "We are not threatening to attack your station. We are promising to destroy it. The only question is whether you want to live through the experience." What followed was a demonstration of human determination that would never forget. The human fleet did not attack the station's defenses. Instead, they began ramming their ships directly into the station's hull. One by one, human vessels flew straight at the massive structure at maximum speed. The station's weapons destroyed many of them, but enough got through to begin causing serious damage. Each ramming attack was preceded by a transmission from the attacking ship's pilot. They spoke about their families, their beliefs, and their determination to end aggression forever. Captain Lisa flew her heavy cruiser directly into the station's main reactor while broadcasting a message to her young daughter. "Daddy and I are stopping the bad people so you can grow up safe." Commander James Park rammed his destroyer into the station's command center while singing the same song that human fighters had sung in their final battle months earlier. Pilot after pilot sacrificed themselves, each adding more damage to the station's structure. The defenders fought desperately, but they were facing an enemy that had no regard for their own survival. Every human ship that was destroyed was immediately replaced by another vessel flying straight at the station. After 6 hours of continuous ramming attacks, the station commander finally surrendered. But his surrender message revealed something that horrified more than all the destruction he had witnessed. "We yield," the commander transmitted. "Please stop. We surrender completely. Your species is insane." The human response was delivered by Admiral Martinez in a voice as cold as interstellar space. "We are not insane. We are just willing to pay any price to end your empire's crimes. Remember that when you return to your home worlds." Realize that the humans had discovered something that no other species in galactic history had ever understood. Fear was not just about being afraid to die. It was also about being afraid of creatures who were not afraid to die. The Empire had built their power on intimidation. They conquered other species by making them afraid of death and suffering, but humans had removed fear from the equation entirely. When death becomes an acceptable cost for victory, the enemy cannot threaten you with anything that matters. Watched morale collapse throughout their empire over the following weeks. Reports reached him of soldiers refusing orders, commanders abandoning their posts, and entire fleets retreating without engaging human forces. The mighty war machine was being defeated not by superior weapons or tactics, but by an enemy that simply would not stop fighting no matter how many times they were killed. For the first time since beginning his observation, began to wonder if the humans might actually win this war. More troubling still, he was beginning to understand that a human victory would change the entire balance of power in the galaxy forever. The war ended 6 months after the siege of Station 7, but not in the way expected. He had anticipated a long, bloody campaign as human forces fought their way to the home worlds. Instead, the Empire collapsed from within. Soldiers throughout the galaxy began abandoning their posts rather than face human attacks. Their commanders stopped issuing offensive orders and focused entirely on defending their remaining territory. Some fleets actually fled their assigned sectors without engaging human forces at all. The final blow came when the High Council sent a message directly to Earth's government requesting peace negotiations. Intercepted the transmission and was amazed by its tone. The message was not written by proud warriors demanding honorable terms. It was a desperate plea for mercy written by leaders who were terrified of continued war. To the human government, the message began, we formally request an immediate ceasefire and the opening of peace negotiations. We are prepared to discuss terms for ending hostilities between our peoples. The human response came from President Santos herself. Her words were simple, but carried an authority that made even feel uneasy. The Empire will surrender unconditionally or face complete destruction. There will be no negotiations. You have 72 hours to decide. Expected to reject such harsh terms and continue fighting. Instead, they agreed to surrender within 24 hours. The formal ceremony took place aboard a human flagship in neutral space, positioned his observation ship nearby to record the historic moment. What he witnessed changed his understanding of humanity forever. When the delegation arrived for the surrender ceremony, expected to see a typical conquest ritual. In every previous war he had observed, victorious species humiliated their defeated enemies before enslaving or exterminating them. The humans did neither. President Santos met the leaders in a simple conference room rather than forcing them to kneel in a public ceremony. She offered them chairs and refreshments. She spoke to them respectfully, as equals rather than as conquered enemies. Your empire's actions have caused immense suffering throughout the galaxy, Santos said calmly. But we do not seek revenge. We seek justice and lasting peace. The High Chancellor, a massive warrior named who had personally ordered the conquest of dozens of worlds, seemed confused by this treatment. Why do you not gloat over our defeat? He asked. Why do you not demand tribute and slaves as payment for your victory? President Santos looked surprised by the question, because that is not justice, that is just another form of conquest. What followed was the most unusual peace agreement had ever witnessed. Instead of demanding reparations or territory, the humans outlined a plan for rehabilitating society. War criminals would face trial, but ordinary citizens would be offered education and assistance in building a peaceful civilization. Conquered worlds that had been enslaved by the would be freed and given aid to rebuild. Military forces would be disbanded, but former soldiers would be offered jobs in humanitarian organizations. Most shocking of all, humans offered to share their advanced medical technology with civilians and to provide food aid to worlds that were suffering from wartime shortages. Stared at President Santos in disbelief. You would help us after we tried to destroy you. We would help you because you tried to destroy us, Santos replied. Violence breeds more violence, but mercy and justice can break that cycle. As watched the ceremony conclude, he realized that the humans had done something unprecedented in galactic history. They had not just won a war, they had transformed their enemies into potential allies. Over the following months, observed the implementation of the human peace plan. Former slaves were liberated and given assistance returning to their home worlds. Civilians received medical care and education about peaceful coexistence with other species. Some resisted these changes, but many others embraced them eagerly. They had grown tired of constant warfare and were grateful for the chance to build something better. Most importantly, other species throughout the galaxy took notice of how humans treated their defeated enemies. Dozens of civilizations that had remained neutral during the war now sent ambassadors to Earth requesting alliance treaties. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted permanently, but not because humans had conquered territory or enslaved other species. It had shifted because humans had proven that strength could be used to protect rather than exploit. As prepared his final report for the Galactic Observation Council, he struggled to find words that could explain what he had witnessed. How could he describe the horror of watching humans sacrifice themselves without hesitation for abstract principles? How could he convey the terror of facing an enemy that welcomed death as readily as victory? But more importantly, how could he explain the strange hope he felt when watching humans offer mercy to those who had tried to destroy them? His final report took him 3 weeks to complete. When he submitted it to the council, he knew it would shock them as much as his observations had shocked him. "Council members," he wrote, "I have completed my observation of the human conflict. I must begin with an urgent recommendation. Humanity should be offered immediate membership in the Galactic Council with full voting rights and protection under galactic law." He could imagine the Council's reaction to that opening statement. No species had ever been offered immediate membership. Most civilizations waited centuries to be considered worthy of joining galactic society. But continued with his reasoning. Humans do not fight wars the way other species do. They do not fight primarily for survival, territory, or resources. They fight for ideas that exist only in their minds: freedom, justice, protection of innocence. These concepts drive them to acts of sacrifice that defy all logical military doctrine. This makes them the most dangerous species I have ever observed, not because of their weapons or tactics, but because of their willingness to die for beliefs rather than live for personal gain. When facing extinction, most species become desperate and irrational. Humans become more determined and focused. When offered the choice between survival and principles, they choose principles. This makes them impossible to defeat through conventional warfare. But I have also observed something else about humans. They are equally willing to show mercy and compassion to former enemies. They seek to transform conflict rather than simply win it. They offer justice rather than revenge. The Empire, which conquered dozens of worlds and enslaved millions of beings, has been not just defeated, but rehabilitated through human intervention. This transformation would have been impossible under any other species' leadership. Paused in his writing, knowing that his next words would be the most important of his career. "I believe humans represent a new form of civilization that the galaxy has never seen before. They possess both the strength to destroy their enemies completely and the wisdom to choose a better path. We have two choices regarding humanity. We can treat them as a threat to be contained or controlled, which will inevitably lead to conflict we cannot win. Or we can embrace them as allies and learn from their unique approach to justice and peace. I strongly recommend the second option. Humans do not seek to conquer the galaxy. They seek to improve it. We should help them succeed." Transmitted his report to the council and waited for their response. He had no idea if they would accept his recommendations or dismiss them as the confused observations of an observer who had spent too much time studying primitive species. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. The galaxy would never be the same after humanity's introduction to interstellar warfare. Whether that change would be for better or worse would depend entirely on how the established powers chose to respond to humanity's unique approach to conflict and peace. As he prepared for the journey back to Council space, found himself hoping that wisdom would prevail over fear. The galaxy needed what humans had to offer. The question was whether the galaxy would be wise enough to accept it.